Good evening, I'm Jeffrey Bitzer. As I prepared for tonight's presentation, I realized I've spent most of my life performing in one way or another. As a broadcast journalist on 3 local stations, my performances were public, but not as public as you'd imagine, more of an intimate conversation with a box of wires. I spent nearly 30 years singing and dancing, trying to teach communications law to journalism majors at Shippensburg University. It was a 2.5-hour lecture required class. I proudly count York's own Jason Plotkin and Fox 43's Evan Foster as former journalism students who are working. I've spent nearly 40 years as a York County attorney where courtrooms have their own performances. Each player has a well-defined role. Some could be scripted in advance, but my favorite performances are almost nonverbal. Paul McCartney of the Beatles inspired many bass players of my generation. He was so big, the German Hofner bass that he played became known as the Beatle bass, and he still plays it. He was cool, he was popular, he got the girls, and he is an amazing bass player. As I began playing the bass at age 12, I learned the first rite of passage. You have to rip off your finger pads and replace them with water blisters in order to play. We have all tried tape and gloves, but ultimately, hard-earned calluses become your best friend. The other issue with bass playing is the simple challenge of moving the bass about. I had to bring the bass into the showroom to be sure it would fit when I bought my last car. And when I was in high school, my father would drive me to school in a small car with the top of the bass sticking out the sunroof in all kinds of weather, and it was cold. The bottom line was I wanted to play bass, and I did for many years with York guitarist Ray Iker. We played the Central Pennsylvania coffee house circuit at age 16. Somewhere, some coffee house nearly every weekend, including the Back Door, which was a coffee house located at the back of the Colonial Plaza. But most of my playing for the last 30 years has been in the pit of community theaters. The tradition has been to play in a hole in the front of the theater in front of the stage. It's where everything falls when it falls off the stage. Dancer's shoes, fake fog, and even an occasional thespian. The pit, it's the orchestra's place to be, to feel a part of the show. Be better than pre-recorded soundtracks because we are firstly accompanists who can speed up or slow down and jump measures to cover mistakes made by an actor. We probably listen as much as we play. The current trend, however, seems to be to put the pit anywhere but the pit. The Belmont often moves the pit to the wood shop behind the stage. Dream Rights has moved the pit in many shows to a conference room on the second floor. I can tell you more and more of the 70 or more shows I've played, I've never even seen. The cast will stop in for a warm-up, but the pit director watches the show on a television monitor, and we play. I find the bass plays most of the time, adding bottom to the string sections and joining in the muscle of the brass and the trombones and the tubas. Pit people, we find, are old and young, retired teachers, students, accountants, and even attorneys, x-ray technicians, and veterinary assistants. The thing to know is most of us are volunteers. We don't get paid for the 8 rehearsals and the 8 shows of a typical run. Most pitsters began playing as children and simply can't stop. Sometimes there's downtime between songs. Modern pitsters spend that time on their phones, eating the traditional red Twizzler licorices, reading, grading papers, knitting, addressing Christmas cards, and yes, sometimes even nodding off. So, why do we do it? Well, it's a total immersion therapy. There's nothing you can think about when you're playing except playing. You cannot think about your stressors when you're playing. And there's a camaraderie, a basic core group of people that move together from theater to theater and play together often. I like the variety of the musical styles Pit offers us, from the rock opera Tommy to the concerts, the Berlin Jazz Cabaret and the 60s stylings of Chorus Line. I'm showing you now a picture of the first bass I ever owned. It's an Ampeg baby bass, and it straddled the tradition between the electric and the upright, and you could bow it. Like a bass guitar, it had an E, A, D, G string set up at the bottom, just as guitars do. The traditional pit dress is black to be invisible when we're visible. Many of us have more black in our closets than Johnny Cash. In this photo, I'm playing a 3/4 size bass. Most basses you see, probably 95%, are 3/4 size. They are relatively portable as basses go. I played mine at the Kiwanis Lake Be-Ins in the late 60s, and again in recent years when we all came back to be in again. I've played with some of these folks on and off for more than 50 years. Old hippies who couldn't stop playing. Some people will never grow into their basses. This is an octabass from Montreal. It is as big as they get. Sometimes it takes two people to play them. But now basses come in all sizes. The tradition was that the tallest 12-year-old was drafted to take over the school bass. Now basses come in sizes so that kids can get better sooner because they start sooner. Tell your kids. They are great instruments with great opportunities to play in orchestras, jazz trios, bluegrass, rock bands, and occasionally even in marching bands. If you're a mummer, and who isn't? The bass is organic, it can rattle your organs, you can feel it in your body, you can feel it in your soul, and when it's all said and done, it really is all about the bass. Thank you.